Have you ever read that part of the Bible that says the sons of God took for themselves the daughters of men? And from that union came giants, the Nephilim? That's right. This enigmatic passage is found in Genesis 6, and for centuries, it has puzzled Bible readers around the world. After all, what exactly is going on here? Celestial beings cohabiting with women? And what about the so-called Nephilim? Were they the offspring of this forbidden union? In this video, we're going to dive deep into this mysterious text, but with an important warning: not everything is black and white. There are different interpretations, and scholars do not all agree. That's why, rather than impose an answer, I want to invite you to reflect along with me. See what Genesis chapter 6, verses 1-4 says. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same became mighty men who were of old, men of renown. The best way to begin exploring this text is by discovering who the sons of God actually were. Throughout history, three main interpretations have emerged. First, the line of Seth, an old and very popular interpretation, says that the sons of God were the descendants of Seth, the godly lineage that remained faithful to the Lord, and the daughters of men were the descendants of Cain, who had turned away from God. This view attempts to preserve a natural reading of the text without involving spiritual beings. However, there's a problem. The Bible never uses the expression sons of God to refer to the line of Seth. Second, angels. The oldest interpretation, found even in Jewish texts from the Second Temple period, is that the sons of God were angels. Yes, celestial beings who took human women as wives. This idea is reinforced by the way the expression sons of God is used elsewhere in the Bible, and we'll get to that in a moment. Third, tyrant kings or mythological heroes. Another interpretation sees the sons of God as powerful kings from antiquity, perhaps inspired by semi-legendary figures like Gilgamesh, part man, part god. Men who set themselves up as gods among humans, abusing their power and taking as many women as they wished. So how do we decide between these options? The key is to examine the original usage of the expression sons of God in the Hebrew Bible. It appears only a few times in the rest of the Old Testament. In Job 1:6 and 2:1, the sons of God appear as angels presenting themselves before God. Still in Job, in chapter 38, verse 7, they sing as God lays the foundations of the earth. In other words, they are celestial beings. In Daniel 3:25, King Nebuchadnezzar sees someone in the furnace like a son of the gods, another reference to a divine being. In other words, whenever the exact expression sons of God is used in the Old Testament, it refers to angels, not to humans. But does this understanding continue into the New Testament? We can say yes. Peter writes, For if God spared not the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. Here lies the key. Peter mentions two sequential events, the fall of the angels and the flood in Noah's day, as part of a single argument. His reasoning goes like this. God judged the angels who sinned. First event. God judged humanity in Noah's time. Second event. Therefore, God is just to continue judging evil even today. This close connection between the two events, fallen angels and the flood, suggests that Peter is echoing the narrative in Genesis 6, where these two elements also appear together. The union of the sons of God with the daughters of men, and the growing human corruption that leads to the flood. The next example works the same way. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah led to their condemnation, but Lot was saved. It's as if Peter is saying, remember the story of the angels who crossed the line just before Noah's time? God judged them. And he also judged that corrupt generation with the flood. So will he do now? This interpretation becomes even stronger when compared with the text in Jude 6-7, which presents the same topic in more detail. And the angels who kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Let's break this down. First, Jude speaks of angels who crossed their boundaries. They kept not their first estate, meaning they abandoned the heavenly position God had given them, and they left their own habitation, suggesting they took a rebellious initiative, something outside God's order. Then he connects this to Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities were destroyed because of extreme sexual sin, fornication, and going after strange flesh. And notice the detail. Jude says the angels did the same thing as the inhabitants of Sodom. In other words, they indulged in an unnatural form of sexuality. This is a clear link to Genesis 6, where the sons of God, angels, take human women, a transgression involving abandoning the spiritual realm and engaging in physical relationships outside of God's order. Jude uses this as a warning example. If God judged even the angels when they crossed the boundaries between heaven and earth, do you think he will ignore the corruption of false teachers? Now we come to the most debated point. Who were the Nephilim? Were they the offspring of fallen angels and human women? Look again at Genesis 6:4, which says, "There were giants on the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same became mighty men who were of old, men of renown." Some claim that the Nephilim were the offspring of this union. In other words, hybrids, half angel, half human. This is the view supported, for example, in the Book of Enoch, written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, where the fallen angels are called watchers, and their children are giant devourers who corrupt the entire earth. However, this reading isn't the most consistent with the biblical text. Notice what it says, "in those days," and also after that. Genesis 6:4 indicates that the Nephilim were already on the earth before the union between angels and human women, and also afterward. In other words, the phrase, "in those days," and also after that, doesn't establish cause and effect, but simply states that the Nephilim already existed when the angels began to interact with women. They weren't the children of these unions. The end of the verse acts as a parenthetical comment, saying that these men were mighty and men of renown. In summary, it's as if Moses were saying, those Nephilim you've heard about in oral tradition, they were around during that time, but they didn't come from that forbidden union. In other words, the text seems to be doing the opposite of what many imagine. It's not creating a mythology, it's deconstructing one. While other cultures claimed their heroes were the children of gods and human women, it's as if Genesis is saying the opposite. These powerful men existed, but they weren't the result of angel-human unions. They were just men. But why does this matter? Because there are some real theological risks here. When we blame the angels for all the earth's corruption, as the apocryphal book of Enoch does, we end up transferring the responsibility for evil to external beings. Because of this, people who follow that reading might argue that God, to eliminate those hybrids, decided to wipe out nearly all of humanity. But in reality, God says to Noah, "The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." Notice he says nothing about eliminating hybrid beings, children of angels and humans. Another problem with the idea that the giants were born from the union of angels and women is that they should have been completely wiped out in the flood. But interestingly, they show up again elsewhere in the Old Testament. When the spies sent by Moses explored Canaan, they reported the presence of giants, the sons of Anak, and said they felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Deuteronomy also mentions the Anakim, linked to the Rephaim, another term for giants. And of course, we have the famous Goliath, who according to the biblical text was nearly 9 feet tall. Those who claim these giants were angelic offspring propose 2 explanations for their existence after the flood. Either not all the angels were imprisoned, allowing new unions with women, which would imply a failure on God's part, and God does not fail, or the spies exaggerated their reports. But even that last idea has its problems, since Goliath was, in fact, a giant, not an invention. In the end, the continued presence of giants after the flood seriously weakens that interpretation. If you're passionate about studying the Bible, don't miss this opportunity. I've developed mind maps for every book of Scripture, a clear, practical, and in-depth resource designed to strengthen your understanding. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description, including exclusive bonuses. See you next time.